Preserving slavery has always been the primary preoccupation of rich, white, American capitalist men. So I'm going to refer you, just this week, Raw Story put out a real fucking wonderful piece called "The Second Amendment Was Ratified to Preserve Slavery." In that article, they quote Sally E. Hayden, author of Slave Patrols, Law and Violence in Virginia and the Carolinas. She says in this article, although eligibility for the militias seemed all-encompassing, not every middle-aged white male Virginian or Carolinian became a slave patrol. Notice the interchange of the words militia and slave patrol. Remember what the Second Amendment says about the well-regulated militia. She goes on to say, most Southern men between ages 18 to 45, including physicians and ministers, had to serve on slave patrols in their lives. So the security of a free state was protected by inscription in the militia slave patrols, what we now refer to as the police.
The terms slave patrol and militia were interchangeable and synonymous, literally the same exact thing.
With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood.
Currently, what the communists call their Negro Revolutionary Movement, now masquerading behind the humanitarian banners of civil rights, is contributing tremendous momentum to the communist plans to take over the United States.
You tell them white folk in Mississippi that all the scared niggas are dead. We want black power. We want black power.
Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The amendment would also give the federal government the power to enforce that principle.
I heard about Sacramento. I was like, damn, these brothers are bad. They're here up in Sacramento in the capital, packing.
Tear down this wall.
Hey fam, welcome to Punks for Progress. I'm Reverend Aaron. In this video, we're going to tackle the question of how the fuck do we get to a place where a 17-year-old kid grabs up his rifle, gets in his car, and drives across state lines, lusting after the hope and dream that he just might be able to shoot himself some people protesting in defense of black lives in a country built on systemic racism. He ends up achieving his goal, shoots a bunch of people, murders a couple of them in the process, then casually strolls by the cops and is able to get in his truck and drive back across state lines and go home, all the while feeling like he's some sort of modern day version of a glorious warrior for God. How did we get to that place? Well, it is a long story. I think I can tell it in one video. but it does stretch back to the very formation and birth of this country, this Amerikkka. So yeah, that's the topic for this video. We're gonna go from the birth of Amerikkka to what we're seeing right now all around us in late August of 2020, when a heavily weaponized, heavily armed, heavily brainwashed death cult militia has set its sights on the poorest, most disenfranchised, most depressed, most marginalized communities in this country, and considers themselves heroes when they murder them. Guess you can call this a sort of P for P's, people's history of racist fucking Amerikkka. Okay, fam, we're back. Now look, like I said, we're going to take it all the way back to the literal fucking forming of this country, right? So it's no question that slavery is, and no secret that slavery was definitely an integral part of the formation of this country, right? So like, you've got a bunch of wealthy white dudes who have enough money to buy other people and then buy up a bunch of land, or they just gift themselves the land at the expense of the indigenous people that they slaughtered once they got here. And then they use the labor of the people that they purchased on the land that they stole or purchased from the people who stole it to build vast, vast fortunes for themselves. In the midst of all this, these wealthy landowners decide we don't want to give money back to the crown in England anymore. So we're going to set up our own country. And they have a revolution and they set up a constitution, and within it, they're keen to declare that black people are only 3/5 human so that they can own them. And then they put what I think is one of the most telling amendments to the Constitution. It tells us so much that we need to know about the core foundations upon which Amerikkka was built. And that's the Second Amendment. Now, trust it's not for any of the reasons that that gun nut people think. Okay, so you've heard much about the well-regulated militia. What's important to understand, so the Second Amendment says, that the right, for the purposes of a well-regulated militia, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You look at the time, the framing of this amendment, the terms slave patrol and militia were interchangeable and synonymous. They were literally the same exact thing. They weren't trying to be tricky when they wrote militia. Everyone there in the room understood they were talking about slave patrols. This is just one of the words they talked about. And what they were if the people that had been purchased by these white people escaped the bonds of forced slavery, they could call up different people from the community to grab up their guns and go track down these people who had escaped the ownership of these rich white descendants of Europe. That's what the Second Amendment was about. It's not about a well-regulated militia to protect the country from the, some invading force from outside. This was literally about understanding that one of the foundational elements of Amerikkkan capitalism was the slave trade and was the cotton trade and the plantation industrial complex, if you will, that the entire economic structure of this new country would be built on. The fantastic wealth and prosperity would be built on the labor of these people that they had stolen from their land in Africa and brought here to be purchased and owned, and their labor stolen from by rich white people. And they put in that document the infrastructure in which to say, okay, look, we have to make sure that these people that we stole and that we're going to force to build our fortunes on don't pick up and run away. It's the Second Amendment. Well, at some point, there's a civil war, right? People begin to think, hey, man, maybe we shouldn't own people and force them to work for us. They were called abolitionists. A lot of them were people who had escaped the bonds of slavery. A lot of them were white people, northerners versus the southern. And I don't have to get you up to speed on those dynamics, but yes, we have a civil fucking war. And I think one of the crucial moments within the Civil War is the year of 1864. Now, to me, that year is significant for a couple of reasons. One, it's the year Nevada is born. Becomes a state. Nevada becomes a state along with West Virginia and takes on the motto, Battle Born, in order to finally ratify the Emancipation Proclamation and to join forces with the northern states to ultimately defeat the racist South in their racist, treasonous, violent, terrorist, murderous bid to protect racism and to protect slavery, right? The Civil War. So in 1864, Nevada signs on as a state and helps essentially win the Civil War against the South. But at the same time in 1864, that's the year of the First International, which is the first gathering of the sort of international socialist community. What's happening at this time is we're about to enter, it's the beginning stages of the industrialization of the world. And a lot of people began to look and say, okay, there's these capitalists that are emerging out of this, and the feudalism is clearly, over, and there may be some remnants of it, but it's going. It's history now, right? And capitalism is becoming the order of the day, and the industrialization of the world is beginning, and we're seeing, and so these socialists come out and say, well, let's take a real close look. Let's take a material analysis of the conditions for these wealthy capitalists and the workers whose work they rely on to maintain their wealth. Because it wasn't just the slave people, the purchase people, that this is the economy that led to the Industrial Revolution, right? This is the backs upon which the Industrial Revolution was able to then kick off and thrive, on the backs of this slave economy. But it's important to point out that these socialists, anarchists, communists had got together and had a first international gathering to say, okay, what is this? What does it really look like? Well, and of course, what they determined that these wealthy industrialists, these capitalists, would ultimately consolidate wealth and power into fewer and fewer hands on the backs of more and more and more people, and it would ultimately, like we're seeing today, result in a handful of monopolies that yield immense power over the global economy and the workers of the entire world. And the conditions for those workers, if you do a proper material analysis like these first socialists determined you should, you'll see that the conditions for those workers are disgusting and deplorable. But the North wins the Civil War, right? And at this time, what gets signed into place is the 13th and the 14th Amendment. Now, the 13th Amendment supposedly ends slavery, but it has within it an exception clause. So it's slavery in the United States unless duly convicted of a crime, shall be abolished in the United States and surrounding territories. That's not exactly right, but that's the exception clause. If you've been convicted of a crime, slavery can still persist. So the slavery was not defeated in the Civil War. What was defeated was these handful of treasonous fucking plantation owners in the South, their ability to enjoy private ownership of other people. It was at that time that slavery switched from that method to state ownership of people.
Abolition. Today.
The labor system that took shape in the late 19th century developed coercive means to ensure that cotton remained king. It was called convict leasing. Get arrested on a minor charge or a trumped-up charge, you could find yourself locked up and then hired out to a corporation bidding on inmate labor. The pipeline from prisons to profits in this country has deep roots.
The aftermath of slavery was in some ways worse than slavery itself. Unlike before, when someone who owned you, driving you too hard was counterproductive because you would lose your investment. Convict leasing was different. You could get them cheaper, and if you actually drove them to death, there was more where that came from.
In the 13th Amendment, which ends the institution of slavery, of course, there is a loophole. Convicts who have been convicted of a crime, they actually can be forced to work for free.
In Alabama in 1850, 99% of the people who were incarcerated were white. In Alabama by the 1880s, 85% of the people incarcerated were black. So we could have a debate about how many of those black people were actually innocent, or we could have a conversation about the use of the criminal justice system to target both the innocent and the guilty alike. That continues all the way to the present, where even today, about just under 40% of the nation's prisoners are black, and yet the African American population's about 13%. They are snatching up bodies everywhere to fuel this system.
The idea in which more money can be made out of their incarceration is still very much part of our criminal justice system.
Abolition. Today. Abolition. Today.
It was also at this time that these militias, those slave patrols that the Second Amendment made room for, that's when they become police forces. That's when they become heavily funded and more uniform, almost not militarized, but organized into the police force. Because it's their job to make sure that they catch the black person loitering or walking down the street with not enough money in their pocket or looking at a white woman or whatever the black code laws that get put in place, the things that you can't do while black. And these are just the most minuscule of charges, all the way up to, rape and murder. And in most cases, the vast majority of cases, they committed neither, but they still get accused of them. They get lynched. All the lynchings go into full force. You have the Klan, which kicks into place full force, doing its rampant terrorist murder all across the country.
The Klan was born 100 years ago in Pulaski, Tennessee, as a 6-member social club. But 6 years later, the Klan had 500,000 members, and the burning cross, the Klan trademark, became a symbol of the violence it used to keep the newly freed Negroes in their place. In 1915, D.W. Griffith produced and directed what has been called the first great feature-length motion picture, The Birth of a Nation, whose subject was the Ku Klux Klan. Today, this film, made 50 years ago, is still shown to Klansmen as the classic example of what other generations of Southerners did to protect white supremacy. These are some scenes from The Birth of a Nation. A chance witnessing of 2 white children under a bedsheet scaring a group of Negro children is depicted as the birth of the idea for the Klan. The idea is successful. Robed and masked, Klansmen are able to frighten the Negroes. In a fight, The Negro sought for scaring a white girl and causing her to jump from a cliff to her death. Kills a white man. Captured, the killer is taken into the woods and put on trial. The Klan passes judgment. The culprit is killed, and his body deposited at the door of the lieutenant governor. In the same year the Birth of a Nation was first released, a new leader rose to head the Klan. William Joseph Simmons, one-time salesman of ladies' garters, in this rare newsreel film, leads his followers up Stone Mountain in Georgia for the first initiation ceremony of the reincarnated Klan. Simmons added something new to the Klan uniform, a stylized face mask, which he alone could wear. He also insisted the Klan operate in total secrecy. The Klan's sinister power grew as new recruits joined, some through coercion, and its clandestine activities increased. In the first 14 months after World War I, 70 Negroes were lynched, 14 burned. In 1922, Imperial Wizard Simmons could not overcome intra-Klan difficulties and was replaced by a dentist from Dallas, Dr. Hiram Evans, who inherited a depleted treasury from Simmons, as well as his title of Imperial Wizard. In 1923, Evans established headquarters in Washington to be closer to Congress, the Klan's next target. The Klan was so powerful in Oregon in 1923 that it was able to elect the president of the state Senate and the Speaker of the House. In Ohio, Klan-supported candidates became mayors of Toledo, Akron, Columbus, and other cities. At the National Democratic Convention in New York in 1924, it is estimated that at least 350 delegates were Klansmen, and they were responsible for the defeat of Governor Alfred Smith as the Democratic nominee. By 1925, the Ku Klux Klan was big business. Almost 6 million Americans now belonged to the Klan, and the organization was grossing $75 million a year. Some 40,000 Klansmen and Klanswomen crowded into Washington on August 8, 1925, to parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. To help the Klan coffers, a flag was used to catch money thrown in by spectators.
Meanwhile, these police forces are going up and just snatching up all these black people that have supposedly just been, quote unquote, freed from slavery from the plantations, charge them with anything and everything, and under the 13th Amendment exception clause can then farm them back out to those same plantations and slave owners that they had just been, quote unquote, freed from. But what happens is the state and the capitalist structure itself is set up to get its cut of the profit. At the same time, there's all these Reconstruction policies that go into place, which don't last, which there's massive concerted efforts that go instantly in place simultaneously to destroy them. But there are some really, really fantastic heroic stories of black people taking agency and creating a little bit of foundations for wealth for themselves and becoming entrepreneurs and tackling education and becoming leaders in their communities. It culminates in things like, Black Wall Street, which of course we recognize and honor during every year at Juneteenth, which was just burnt to the ground. This was the beginning of the first sort of economic agency for the black community in America, and it was completely, like we know, just leveled, along with all communities and homes and just hundreds of people that surrounding the area that Black Wall Street was in Tulsa. Just mass murder and slaughter. And then again, and then it's on the heels of all the segregation laws go into place, right? And then so what you have that grows out of all of that, out of the segregation and the Jim Crow and the segregation at the lunch counters and you got to sit in the back of the bus, all this stuff, and black kids not going to the same schools as white people, all of this infrastructure that's put in place across the country. Well, at one point black people in this country said, hey man, I'm a man, I'm a human being, I'm a woman, I'm a human being, I deserve to eat the same place people eat, I deserve to drink from the same fountain. And out of this grows the civil rights movement, right?
It's just me against the world. Stop for me. It's the world.
Let them hang me, John Brown had written. I am worth inconceivably more to hang than for any other purpose. After a life of failure, John Brown is finally a success. Some 1,500 soldiers massed in the open field, guns at the ready. No civilians were allowed. But an actor from Virginia borrowed a uniform so he could watch John Brown die. I looked at the traitor, said John Wilkes Booth, with unlimited, undeniable contempt. But John Brown had reached the place where he wanted to go.
He believed that God had led him to this moment and that this was his death and his resurrection and the fulfillment of God's purpose for him on this earth.
Oh, John Brown's body lies molding in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured out to save. And though he lost his life in his struggle to free the slaves, his truth is marching on. John Brown's body lies molding in the grave. John Brown's body lies molding in the grave. John Brown's body lies molding in the grave, but his truth still marches on. John Brown was a hero, undaunted, true, and brave. Kansas knew his valor when he fought her rights to save. And now, though the grass grows green above his grave, his truth still marches on.
about Sacramento, I was like, damn, these brothers are bad. They're here up in Sacramento in the capital, packing.